The turkey sat untouched, its golden skin glistening under the chandelier, mocking the silence in the room. My husband, Ethan, was gone, vanished without a word, leaving only a crumpled note on the kitchen counter. I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. And there I was, staring at his stepfather, Harold, across the Thanksgiving table, his smug grin slicing through my shock like a knife. The house felt like a stage, the air heavy with the scent of sage and betrayal. Harold, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and a penchant for control, leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of red wine. "Well, Claire," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Looks like it's just you and me now." I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles whitening. Ethan's absence wasn't just a disappearance, it was a detonation. And I was standing in the rubble. But I wasn't as helpless as Harold thought. I had a plan, one I'd been piecing together for months, ever since I found the first clue that Ethan wasn't the man I thought he was. It started with a text message I wasn't meant to see. 3 months ago, on a rainy September evening, Ethan had left his phone on the couch, and when it buzzed, I glanced at it out of habit. The name, Lila, flashed on the screen, followed by a single line, "Meet me at the cabin. Don't tell her." My heart stopped. Lila. I knew that name, Ethan's ex, the one he swore was out of his life for good. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I waited, watched, and gathered fragments of a truth he thought he'd buried. Bank statements showing unexplained withdrawals, late-night calls he took in the garage, a receipt for a necklace I never received. Each piece was a shard of glass, cutting deeper, but I held them close, building my case. Now, on Thanksgiving, with Ethan gone and Harold smirking like he'd won some twisted game, I felt the weight of those shards. Harold had always been a shadow in our marriage, meddling, manipulating, whispering in Ethan's ear about how I wasn't good enough. He'd raised Ethan after marrying Ethan's mother when Ethan was 10, and he never let anyone forget his role as the savior. But I saw through him the way he controlled Ethan, the way he looked at me like I was a problem to be solved. Tonight, though, I wasn't just Claire, the betrayed wife. I was Claire, the woman who'd been planning for this moment. "Harold," I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest, "why don't we have some pie? I made it special for tonight." His eyes narrowed, but he nodded, unaware that the pie wasn't just dessert, it was the opening move in a game he didn't know we were playing. I stood, smoothing my apron, and walked to the kitchen, my mind racing. The note Ethan left wasn't a surprise. I'd known he was planning to leave, thanks to a burner phone I'd found hidden in his car 2 weeks ago. What Harold didn't know was that I'd been tracking Ethan's movements, and I knew exactly where he was tonight with Lila, at a cabin 2 hours away. And I wasn't going to let either of them walk away unscathed. As I sliced the pie, I thought about the letter I'd written, the one tucked in my pocket. It was addressed to Harold's wife, Margaret, Ethan's mother, who was away visiting her sister. Margaret deserved to know the truth about her husband's role in pushing Ethan toward Lila, about the money Harold had been funneling to keep Ethan's secrets. I'd found the bank records last month, buried in a folder Harold thought was secure. He'd been enabling Ethan's affair, thinking it would break me. But they'd underestimated me. I returned to the dining room, setting a slice of pecan pie in front of Harold. "Eat up," I said, smiling. He took a bite, oblivious to the storm brewing. I sat across from him, folding my hands. "Harold, do you think Ethan's coming back?" His chewing slowed, his eyes flicking to mine. "Doubt it," he said, leaning forward. "He's weak, Claire. Always has been. You're better off without him." His words were meant to wound, but they only fueled me. I nodded, playing the part of the broken wife. "Maybe you're right," I said softly. "But I'm not alone. Am I? I have you." His grin widened, and I wanted to scream. Instead, I reached for my wine glass, letting the moment linger. This was just the beginning. Tonight, I'd let Harold think he had the upper hand. Tomorrow, I'd start dismantling their world, piece by piece. The letter to Margaret was just the first step. I'd already contacted a lawyer, a private investigator, and Lila's husband, Tom, who had no idea his wife was with Ethan. Together, we'd make sure Ethan and Harold faced the consequences of their betrayal. Thanksgiving was supposed to be about gratitude, but this year, it was about justice, and I was ready to serve it cold. The morning after Thanksgiving, the house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums and makes you question your own breathing. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the untouched leftovers. The turkey now cold and congealed. Harold had left late last night. His parting words a patronizing. "You'll be fine. Claire, you're tough." But I wasn't just tough, I was armed. I pulled the letter from my pocket, its edges worn from my nervous fingers. It was a carefully crafted weapon, every word chosen to cut deep. "Dear Margaret," it began, "there are things you need to know about Harold and Ethan." I detailed Harold's financial support for Ethan's affair, the bank transfers, the secret meetings. I included dates, amounts, even a photocopy of a check I'd found in Harold's study when he thought I was just cleaning. Margaret was a kind woman, frail but sharp, and she'd always treated me like a daughter. This letter would break her heart, but it would also open her eyes. I sealed the envelope and drove to the post office, my hands steady on the wheel. The air was crisp, the November sky a pale gray that mirrored my resolve. I didn't just mail the letter, I sent a copy to my lawyer, Karen, a woman with a reputation for dismantling men like Harold in court. She'd been thrilled when I called her last week, her voice crackling with excitement over the evidence I'd gathered. "Claire," she'd said, "this is a gold mine. We'll bury them." I believed her. Back home, I checked my phone. Tom, Lila's husband, had texted, "Found the cabin. They're there. What's next?" My heart raced. Tom was a quiet man, a high school math teacher with a gentle demeanor. But betrayal had a way of hardening even the softest souls. I'd met him 2 weeks ago at a coffee shop, both of us shaking as I showed him the texts between Ethan and Lila. He'd gone pale, his hands gripping his mug like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. "I thought she was working late," he'd whispered. I'd felt his pain, a mirror to my own. Now, we were allies in this war. I texted back, "Meet me at 3 p.m. at the diner on Route 12. Bring everything you have." I had one more stop to make before then, a private investigator, Mike, who'd been tailing Ethan for weeks. Mike was a gruff ex-cop with a knack for finding dirt, and he'd delivered. Photos of Ethan and Lila at the cabin, grainy but unmistakable. Receipts from a gas station near the cabin, time-stamped. Even a recording of a phone call between Ethan and Harold, where Harold laughed about keeping Claire in the dark. Every piece was another nail in their coffin. At the diner, Tom slid into the booth across from me, his eyes red-rimmed but focused. He pushed a folder across the table. "Lila's credit card statements," he said. "She's been booking the cabin for months." I nodded, adding them to my own pile of evidence. "We're not just going after them," I said. "We're going to make sure they can't hide." Tom's jaw tightened. "I want her to feel what I felt," he said. I understood. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming our dignity. We spent the next hour planning. Tom would confront Lila at the cabin tonight, with Mike nearby to record everything. I'd go to Margaret's sister's house tomorrow, when Margaret returned, to deliver the news in person if the letter hadn't already reached her. Karen was preparing legal documents, divorce papers for me, a lawsuit against Harold for fraud. The bank transfers weren't just unethical, they were illegal, funneled through a shell account Harold thought was untraceable. But Mike had traced it, and Karen was ready to pounce. As I drove home, the weight of the day settled on me. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for Margaret, for Tom, for the pieces of our lives that Ethan and Harold had tried to shatter. The plan was in motion. and I felt a strange calm, like the eye of a hurricane. Ethan thought he could disappear and leave me broken. Harold thought he could control the narrative. They were wrong. Tomorrow, I'd face Margaret. Tonight, I'd let Tom take the first swing. The storm was coming, and I was its architect. Margaret's sister's house was a 2-hour drive, through winding roads lined with bare trees that looked like they were reaching for something they'd never grasp. I clutched the steering wheel, my heart pounding as I rehearsed what I'd say. Margaret deserved the truth, but delivering it felt like handing her a live grenade. When I arrived, Margaret was in the garden, her frail hands pruning roses despite the November chill. She was 65, her hair a soft white, her eyes kind but tired. "Claire," she called, her face lighting up. What a surprise. I forced a smile, my stomach twisting. We sat in her sister's kitchen, the smell of coffee grounding me as I slid the letter across the table. "Margaret," I said, my voice catching, "you need to read this." Her hands trembled as she opened it. I watched her eyes scan the words, her face crumpling with each line. "Harold," she whispered. "He did this." I nodded, explaining the bank records, the affair, Ethan's disappearance. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She sat straighter, her jaw tightening. "I trusted him," she said. "I trusted them both." I reached for her hand. "So did I?" I said. "But we're going to make this right." Margaret's strength surprised me. She didn't collapse she planned. "I want to confront him," she said. "Tonight." I hesitated. My plan had been to let the legal system handle Harold. But Margaret's fire was contagious. "Okay," I said. "But we do it together." She nodded, her eyes blazing with a resolve I hadn't seen before. We spent the afternoon strategizing. Margaret called her lawyer, a friend from her book club, and I updated Karen on our plan. By evening, we were ready. We drove to Harold's house, where he'd returned after Thanksgiving. The lights were on, casting a warm glow that felt like a lie. Margaret knocked, her hand steady. Harold opened the door, his smile faltering when he saw us. "Margaret." "Claire." "What's going on?" Margaret held up the letter. "You betrayed us," she said, her voice like steel. Harold's face paled. "It's not what you think," he stammered. But Margaret cut him off. "Don't lie to me," she said. "I know everything." I stepped forward, holding up the bank records. "You funded Ethan's affair," I said. "You thought you could control him. Control me. But you're done." Harold's eyes darted between us, searching for an escape. There was none. Margaret's lawyer had already frozen the Shell account, and Karen was filing charges. Harold's empire of manipulation was crumbling. As we left, Margaret turned to me. "I'm divorcing him," she said, "and I want to help you." I hugged her, tears stinging my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't alone. Back home, I checked my phone. Tom had sent a video grainy footage of him confronting Lila and Ethan at the cabin. Lila was sobbing, Ethan shouting, but Tom stood firm, his voice calm but cutting. "You're done," he said. "Both of you." Mike had caught it all, and the footage was already with Karen. The pieces were falling into place. But I wasn't naive. Ethan and Harold wouldn't go down without a fight. I sat at my kitchen table, the Thanksgiving leftovers still mocking me, and opened my laptop. Karen had sent an email, lawsuit filed. Court date set for next month. I smiled. A real smile this time. The plan was working, but the war wasn't over. Ethan might have disappeared, but I was still here, and I was just getting started. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, a sterile backdrop to the chaos of my life. I sat beside Karen, my hands folded in my lap, as the judge reviewed the documents. Harold sat across the room, his lawyer whispering in his ear, his face a mask of defiance. Ethan wasn't there, he was still hiding, but Mike had tracked him to a motel in the next state. He couldn't run forever. Karen leaned over. "We've got this," she whispered. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, phone recordings, the video from the cabin. But Harold's lawyer was slick, painting me as a vengeful wife, twisting the narrative to make Harold the victim. I felt my nails dig into my palms. But I stayed calm. Margaret was in the gallery, her presence a quiet strength. She'd filed for divorce the day after our confrontation, and her lawyer was working in tandem with Karen. We were a team now, united by betrayal. The judge called me to the stand. I walked forward, my heels clicking on the floor, and swore to tell the truth. Harold's lawyer grilled me, his questions sharp and accusatory. "Isn't it true you fabricated these records to frame my client?" he asked. I looked him in the eye. "No," I said. "I found the truth, and it's all here." I gestured to the evidence, my voice steady. Karen had coached me to stay composed, and I did, even as my heart raced. When it was Harold's turn, he crumbled. His answers were evasive, his confidence replaced by sweat and stammers. The judge's eyes narrowed as Karen presented the bank records, showing transfers from Harold to Ethan's secret account. "This is fraud," Karen said, her voice ringing through the courtroom. "And it's just the beginning." By the end of the day, the judge had ordered a full investigation into Harold's finances. He left the courtroom a smaller man, his arrogance stripped away. Outside, Margaret hugged me. "You were incredible," she said. I shook my head. "We did this," I said. But the victory felt hollow. Ethan was still out there, and Lila was playing the victim, claiming she'd been manipulated by Ethan. Tom had texted me that morning, "She's trying to come back." I'm done. I admired his resolve, but I wasn't ready to let Ethan off the hook. That night, I met Mike at a diner. He slid a folder across the table. "Ethan's at a motel in Carlisle," he said. "He's planning to leave the state." I nodded, my mind racing. I didn't want Ethan back, I wanted him to face what he'd done. "Can you get him to the courthouse?" I asked. Mike grinned. "Already on it." He'd tipped off the local police, who were watching the motel. Ethan's freedom was running out. As I drove home, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago. Trusting, naive, believing in Ethan's love. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who'd learned to fight. The plan wasn't just about exposing Ethan and Harold, it was about reclaiming myself. I pulled into my driveway. The house no longer a prison, but a fortress. Tomorrow, I'd face Ethan. Tonight, I'd sleep, knowing I was one step closer to justice. The motel in Carlisle was a rundown relic, its neon sign flickering like a dying star. I stood in the parking lot, the cold biting through my coat, as Mike pointed to room 17. "He's in there," he said. "Cops are on their way." I nodded, my breath visible in the night air. This wasn't about confrontation, it was about closure. The police arrived quietly, their lights off. I watched from Mike's car as they knocked on the door. Ethan answered, his face haggard, his eyes wide with panic. Lila was behind him, clutching a suitcase. They didn't resist as the officers cuffed them, reading their rights in a monotone that felt surreal against the gravity of the moment. Ethan's eyes met mine through the car window, and for a second, I saw the man I'd loved, the man I thought I'd spend my life with. Then he looked away, and that man was gone. At the station, Karen was waiting. "They're charging Ethan with fraud and Lila with accessory," she said. The bank records tied them both to Harold's scheme. I nodded, my throat tight. I didn't want to see Ethan, but Karen insisted. "You need to face him," she said. "For you." So I did. In the interrogation room, Ethan sat slumped, his hands cuffed. "Claire," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry." I stared at him, searching for the man I'd married. "You didn't just leave me," I said. "You tried to destroy me, but you failed." I walked out, my heart pounding but lighter. Karen drove me home, updating me on Harold's case. The investigation had uncovered more embezzlement, tax evasion, a web of lies that stretched back years. Harold was facing prison time, and Margaret was thriving, free from his shadow. She'd started volunteering at a women's shelter, channeling her pain into purpose. I admired her, and I was learning from her. Tom called that night. "Lila's out on bail," he said, "but I'm done. I filed for divorce." I told him about Ethan, and we laughed. A bitter but cathartic sound. "We're survivors," I said. He agreed. We made plans to meet for coffee, not as allies in revenge, but as friends healing together. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table, the Thanksgiving leftovers long gone. I opened my laptop and started writing not a letter this time, but a journal. I wrote about the pain, the betrayal, but also the strength I'd found. The plan had worked, but it was more than that. It had rebuilt me. Ethan was gone. Harold was finished, and I was free. But freedom came with a price, and I was still paying it, one day at a time. 6 months later, the courtroom was packed. Harold's trial was a spectacle, drawing local reporters and curious neighbors. I sat in the front row, Margaret beside me, her hand steady in mine. Harold looked small in his orange jumpsuit, his bravado gone. The evidence was damning: bank records, witness testimonies, even Ethan's plea deal, which had him testifying against his stepfather to reduce his own sentence. The prosecutor laid out the case. Harold had manipulated Ethan for years, using money and lies to control him. The affair with Lila was just one piece of a larger scheme to maintain power over the family. Margaret's testimony was the turning point. She spoke of Harold's emotional abuse, his financial control, her years of silence. The jury listened, riveted, as she described finding my letter, the moment she realized she wasn't alone. I squeezed her hand, tears in my eyes. When the guilty verdict came, the courtroom erupted in murmurs. Harold was sentenced to 7 years, his assets frozen to pay restitution. Margaret and I walked out into the spring sunlight, the weight of years lifting. "We did it," she said, her voice soft but strong. I nodded. We did. Ethan's trial was quieter. He pleaded guilty, his lawyer citing emotional manipulation by Harold. The judge wasn't swayed, gave Ethan 3 years, with parole possible in 2. Lila got probation, her life in tatters after Tom's divorce. I didn't attend her hearing. She wasn't my fight anymore. That night, I hosted a small dinner at my house. Margaret, Tom, and Karen were there, along with Mike, who'd become a friend. We didn't talk about the trials. We laughed, shared stories, ate lasagna instead of turkey. It wasn't Thanksgiving, but it felt like gratitude. I looked around the table, at the people who'd become my family, and felt something new: hope. Later, alone in my bedroom, I opened my journal. I wrote about the trials, but also about the future. I was taking classes, learning to paint, rediscovering who I was without Ethan. The plan had been about justice, but it had given me something more: a life I could call my own. A year after that fateful Thanksgiving, I stood in my backyard, a canvas in front of me, paintbrush in hand. The air was warm, the first hints of summer buzzing around me. My house was different now, brighter, filled with my paintings, my books, my life. The ghosts of Ethan and Harold were gone, replaced by a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed. Margaret had moved to a small apartment near the beach, her days filled with volunteering and gardening. She called me every Sunday, her voice lighter each time. Tom was dating again, a shy smile on his face when he told me about it over coffee. Karen had taken on new clients, but we still met for lunch, our bond forged in battle. Mike sent postcards from his travels, his gruff humor a constant in my inbox. I'd sold the cabin, the one Ethan and Lila had used as their hideout. The money went to a women's shelter, a donation in Margaret's name. It felt right, closing that chapter with something good. My divorce was finalized, the papers a quiet victory. Ethan had written me from prison. A rambling letter of apologies I didn't read. I burned it in the backyard, the flames cleansing. As I painted, I thought about the plan. It had started as a way to survive, to fight back against betrayal. But it had become something more, a path to myself. I wasn't just Claire, the betrayed wife. I was Claire, the artist, the friend, the woman who'd faced the storm and come out stronger. The canvas in front of me was bold, vibrant, a mix of reds and golds that felt like fire, like hope. Thanksgiving was approaching again, and this year, I'd host. Not out of obligation, but because I wanted to. Margaret, Tom, Karen, and Mike would be there, along with new friends I'd made in my art class. There'd be turkey, but also laughter, music, life. Ethan's disappearance had shattered my world, but I'd rebuilt it, piece by piece. Harold's smirk, Ethan's note, Lila's lies, they were shadows now, fading in the light of what I'd become. I set down my brush, stepping back to admire my painting. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough.